Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Rulers of Evil by F. Tupper Saucy. We're currently in Chapter 5 of the book, talking about the early life transformation of Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuit order. And we've talked about his being wounded at the Battle of Pamplona, his leg broken, and in his convalescence underwent some excruciatingly painful attempts to repair his broken leg, his shattered leg, and his veneration of an idol and his reading of quote-unquote sacred books and his eventual travel toward Jerusalem by way of Rome, his attempt to found the Jesuit order, and his attempt to take Jerusalem for the Pope. And we're currently talking about his initiation into the Illuminati. He says, the author writes, while Adrian VI proceeded on to Barcelona, this is at the time of that Adrian VI came to the papal chair. He had met in Barcelona with Ignatius Loyola, who was on his way to Rome. Anyway, he said, while Adrian VI proceeded to Barcelona, Inigo, that is Ignatius Loyola, detoured on foot to the village of Manresa for 10 months of penances, spiritual preparation, and note-taking. Stripped of everything but sackcloth, a gourd for drinking, and a pilgrim's staff, he adopted the lifestyle of the early Knights Templar, begging food and alms. He was initiated into the Illuminati, the Enlightened Ones, a secret society of Gnostic fundamentalists who preached that all matter is absolutely and eternally evil. Now, here is, in this book, is proof that the Illuminati pre-existed Adam Weishaupt and the Bavarian Illuminati. In Spain, it was called the Spanish Alumbrados, and Ignatius Loyola was an initiate of the Illuminati during his moving toward his travel toward Rome. The book continues. It says the Gnostics, now speaking of the Illuminati, a Gnostic sect, the Gnostics taught that humanity itself is of satanic origin. Adam and Eve were the offspring of devils. Humanity can achieve salvation from death and eternal punishment, however, by fleeing soul from body for absorption into the pure light of godliness. This is done by withdrawing from sensual pleasure and intuitively discovering hidden truths as conveyed by the Kabbalah. It says, in parentheses, the Gnostics' attempt for anything having to do with the physical side of existence translated into wildly ironic behavior. Some practiced radical celibacy because they believed the result of sexual intercourse, conception would only imprison more souls in physical bodies. Others practiced unbridled sexual libertinism in order to prove they were completely free from all physical inhibition. Still others combined the two, pursuing hypocritical lives of celibate fornication. In other words, unmarried sex. Celibate meaning unmarried. And so they pursued a hypocritical lives of celibate fornication, of which safe sex is the modern institution. Loyola's particular cult apparently chose the asceticism of self-flagellation. Now, for those who don't know, self-flagellation is the practice of ascetics and monks to punish themselves. Many have seen videos of ascetics parading down the street in nothing but their underwear with whips in their hands, flogging their own backs with whips until the blood runs freely from their backs. That's what self-flagellation is. Loyola's particular cult apparently chose the asceticism of self-flagellation, for Inigo wandered many nights about the Manresa countryside, whipping himself with a scourge studded with iron bars. Later in life, he would decide that the whips and barbs sapped one's strength, that the Godhead could as adequately be sought by the more humane self-mortification of the spiritual exercises. Remember, those were the self-induced hypnotic visualizations and imaginations, and they're quite satanic and devoid of scriptural edification, and relied on direct revelation. Now, he continues, he says, while Inigo was outlining the exercises in Manresa, Luther, he's speaking Martin Luther here now, the beginnings of the Protestant Reformation was taking place at this time. He says, while Inigo, Ignatius Loyola, was outlining the exercises, the spiritual exercises, in Manresa, Martin Luther's translation of the New Testament was introducing readers and listeners in Germany, Switzerland, France, Bohemia, and England to a different form of spiritual exercise, one in which God's will, ancient and immutable, was expressed not within the private imagination, but publicly in the printed word for all to see. People devoured the New Testament even before it reached the bindery. In one contemporary's words, quote, the sheet, yet wet, was brought from the press under one's cloak and passed from shop to shop, unquote. So here we have an ascetic, a self-flagellated, a self-hypnotized, Gnostic illuminist with visions of grandeur of taking Jerusalem for the Pope, and on the other hand, we have a man of God translating the Bible into the German language and printing it for people to be edified by the direct words of Almighty God. That's the difference between the Jesuit order and what we knew then as Protestantism. It resembles almost nothing of its early days today, but nonetheless, Protestantism started out with the Bible. Now, it says, the pilgrims sailed from Barcelona to the Italian port city of Gaeta and walked the remaining distance to Rome, arriving there on Palm Sunday, March 29th, 1523. 2 days later, according to Vatican archives, Inigo de Loyola, cleric of the Diocese of Pamplona, received permission from Pope Adrian VI to visit Jerusalem. So he's seen Pope Adrian VI, who he may have already had some communication with in Barcelona. But he meets Adrian VI at Rome, the new pope, and he's given permission to go to Jerusalem. It says from Rome, Ignatius proceeded to Venice, where one of Charles Habsburg's agents received him graciously and introduced him to the Doge, Andrea Gritti, the highest official in Venetian civil government. A famed diplomat and linguist, Gritti arranged free passage for Inigo aboard a small ship whose name, the Negrona, Negrona, was appropriate for an evangelist dedicated to the black virgin Christian conquest. So there's a reference to the black virgin. And if anybody is familiar with Ignatian history, Loyola's history, he dedicated his order to the Virgin Mary. Okay, so right off the bat, it's idolatry, and it's characterized by Gnosticism, self-hypnosis, and demon possession, I believe. And it says on July 14, 1523, the Negrona left Venice, arriving a month later at the island of Cyprus. At Cyprus, one Diego Maines and his servant, along with several Cypriot officials, boarded ship for the rest of the voyage to Haifa. Diego Maines was a commander of the Knights Hospitallers of St. John of Jerusalem. Okay, this is the first time these have been mentioned now. This is an order of knighthood, and this Diego Maines is the commander of the Knights Hospitallers of St. John of Jerusalem. So Ignatius is in some pretty powerful company now. Since 1312, the Hospitallers had held title to the vast wealth of the Knights Templar. And we'll get in more to the details of what the Knights Templar were all about in the next chapter. But it's interesting to note that this man, Diego Maines, the commander of the Knights Hospitallers of St. John of Jerusalem, who's on the ship with Ignatius Loyola, actually controlled the vast wealth and properties and power that was given to it when the papacy sequestered the Knights Templars. So Ignatius is in some very powerful, rich, and influential company in this ship. It says they had been drawing upon these assets to defend the Roman economy against Islamic marauders in the east. But when the Turks attacked the Hospitallers' headquarters on the island of Rhodes, the assets were frozen by the Pope and his former pupil, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles. So in order to protect these assets, they were frozen. And it says no assistance in any form was forthcoming from either party. Consequently, in December of 1522, the Hospitallers had no choice but to surrender Rhodes and retreat to what would become their final domicile, Malta. The message was clear. Now that Luther's German-language New Testament was in print, Protestantism loomed a greater menace to Rome than Islam ever did. Is it possible that in a Jerusalem-bound ship named Negrona, Commander Diego Maines turned over the litanies, lists, secret codes, formula, Kabbalah, and other portable assets comprising the Knights Templar resources to Ignatius Loyola? If this indeed happened, the Western world's secret infrastructure was now Loyola's to populate and manipulate in the cause of learning against learning. This is my hypothesis, says F. Tupper Saucy. This is my hypothesis. What is not hypothesis is that as soon as the pilgrim returned from Jerusalem, he began vesting himself with Medici learning. The idea of uniting the Templars with the Hospitallers was first argued publicly in a book published in 1305 by Raymond Lull, a renowned Illuminatus of Majorca. Lull's book, Libre de Fine, or Free at Last, appeared in the midst of the raging controversy between the French monarchy and the Roman papacy over who held jurisdiction over the Templars. This is the subject of our next chapter. So in the next chapter, we're going to digress a little bit and come to understand a bit more about the Knights Templar. But it's clearly asserted, in fact, it's a hypothesis of Ignatius Loyola, that he came into possession of the combined mass, wealth, power, and influence of the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitallers on that ship to Negrona. And if this is true, it certainly explains a lot of the mystery behind the power and the influence of the Jesuit order to control so many secret societies that have, down through the centuries, have been offsprings of the Knights Templar and the Knights of the Hospitallers. So we can see the formulation of a vast web of secret societies who eventually would be controlled by the Jesuit general. Now, chapter 6 of the book, we're going to digress a bit. It's entitled The Epitome of Christian Values. Since their founding in French soil in 1118, the Knights Templar had grown from a pair of self-impoverished knights hoping to keep Muslim terrorists from molesting pilgrims in the Holy Land to a mammoth organization controlling international finance and politics. So this is the Knights Templar, originally created to protect idolatrous pilgrims who were seeking the blessings of being in the Holy Land and touching holy relics and kissing the site of Christ's birth and visiting all the quote-unquote holy sites. You know, remember, this is the idolatrous Roman Catholic Church, and one could gain indulgence or forgiveness of sins or other ecclesiastical favors, in other words, simony, by making pilgrimages to Jerusalem. And so sinners sought these pilgrimages to atone for their sins. And it was up to the Knights Templar to protect their assets and to protect their persons on those trips from marauding Muslims. And it says the founders of this Knights Templar was Hugh de Payne and Godfrey de Saint Omer, who organized a group of excommunicated Knights Crusaders and secured their absolution by a bishop. So the founders have been in trouble with the Roman Catholic Church, have been excommunicated, and obviously sought to form a holy order, and were subsequently absolved by a bishop in order to do so. So even the Knights Templar have roots in some kind of misdeed that excited the anger and the excommunication from the church by the papacy. Anyway, after placing the restored knights under oaths of poverty, chastity, secrecy, and obedience, they pledged the organization to rebuilding Solomon's temple, given space adjacent to an Islamic mosque situated on the temple's supposed ruins. They took the corporate name Poor Knights of Christ and the Temple of Solomon. So here now we have a brand new order of knights consecrated in the name of Solomon's temple. And it was their desire to build a temple on God's holy hill in Jerusalem, right next to this so-called Islamic structure that remains to this day. And you've heard it said before here on Inquisition Update that it's the ultimate aim of the papacy to rule from Mount Moriah, or at least to receive worship from Mount Moriah in Jerusalem. And I believe it's an intent to fulfill a prophetic statement by Satan himself in Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 through 14. The 5 I wills of Satan. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. I will sit upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. And what better way for Satan to show his usurped authority and veneration in the world than to sit supreme over the world from Mount Moriah? Nonetheless, no matter what position a person takes on that thesis, the Knights Templar were created to protect pilgrims and to eventually erect a temple, a rebuilding of Solomon's temple on Mount Moriah. And we know, without deviating from the text too much, that Freemasonry desires to do the same thing. And they even have orders of the Knights Templar. So the mutation of these knights remains even today in Freemasonry. And that's the connection that we need to make. Anyway, he continues, Bernard, abbot of Clairvaux, the leading propagandist of the day, extolled the Templars as the epitome and apotheosis of Christian values, unquote. Bolstered by such unprecedented promotion, the poor knights attracted the best and the brightest young men of Europe and became crusaders to vow celibacy and leave their families in defense of Christ's tomb against Muslim terrorists. Again, their focus is on the idolatrous, quote-unquote, holy sites of Israel. It says the mission failed within 9 years. Even so, Bernard's propaganda caused the Templars to be received as conquering heroes when they returned to France. They set up their permanent lodge at Troyes under the patronage of the court of Champagne. For nearly a century, Troyes had been Europe's leading school for the study of the Kabbalah, which may explain why the city is laid out in the shape of a champagne cork. For making the Templars a world power, Bernard shares credit with Cardinal Aymeric of Santa Maria Nuova. Aymeric was the church's highest judicial officer. It was his unlawful connivance that created Honorius II, the Pope who ordained the Templars as the church's most highly esteemed religious order. It was Aymeric who devised a radical inner renewal of the church, which inspired noblemen throughout England, Scotland, Flanders, Spain, and Portugal to shower the Templars with donations of land and money over and above properties required of all initiates upon joining the order. We'll continue when we return to the break.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the Internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Okay, welcome back to the second half hour of Inquisition Update. Remembering the program is heard Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. Central, 11 Eastern. And if you enjoy Inquisition Update, please help sponsor the broadcast and send a contribution, or rather subscribe, and gain access to the archives. And tell your friends and your family to tune in. The information rarely told, the history that helps us make sense of the Bible and Bible prophecy, and the role of America in Bible prophecy. Now, before we continue where we left off, I want to impress upon my listeners something we're seeing, but we might not be comprehending. What we have so far is a mixture, a poisonous mixture of Knights Hospitalarism, Knights Templarism, the roots of Freemasonry, Kabbalah. We have a deranged, self-hypnotized, self-deceived, satanically influenced Illuminatist Gnostic on a mission for Mary, dripping with idolatry, all coming together here right before our very eyes. And there's nothing biblical about this that we've seen so far. And yet, what has become of all of this is the most powerful, the most wealthy, the most lethal, the most influential organization on the planet. The Jesuit order. And it's important for us to do the math while we're listening, connect the dots, so that we might more fully understand the panorama of control that Ignatius Loyola's order comprises. And it's huge. Now, backing up, it says, for making the Templars a world power, Bernard shares credit with... let me back up just a little bit more. It said the mission failed within 9 years. Even so, Bernard's propaganda caused the Templars to be received as conquering heroes when they returned to France. They set up their permanent lodge at Troyes under the patronage of the court of Champagne. And it says, for making the Templars a world power, Bernard shares credit with Cardinal A. Emmerich of Santa Maria Nuova. Emmerich was the church's highest judicial officer. It was his unlawful connivance that created Honorius II, the Pope who ordained the Templars as the church's most highly esteemed religious order. It was Emmerich, too, who devised a radical inner renewal of the church. Now, that's in parentheses. I'd like him to speak more about this. I hope he does. An inner renewal of the church, which inspired noblemen throughout England, Scotland, Flanders, Spain, Portugal, to shower the Templars with donations of land and money over and above the properties required of all initiates upon joining the order. So these Templars were organized much the same as Ignatius Loyola's Jesuit order, in that when they enter as initiates, they turn over everything they own, lock, stock, and barrel, all their assets to the order. In other words, they give up their families, their personal lives, everything, their property, their money, their assets, everything, when they join. And over and above all the wealth that they accumulated from these donations by those who entered the order, there was a hype in the Roman Catholic Church for penitents to donate land and property and vast sums of money to this new order. So it doesn't take one's imagination to figure out this organization is vastly rich. If there's one thing the Roman Catholic Church can do, and that is raise money. Anyway, when Honorius died in 1130, Emmerich led a minority of cardinals in another connivance, resulting in the election of Innocent II, who was consecrated pope in Emmerich's titular church of Santa Maria Nuova. In 1139, Innocent issued a bull placing the Templars under an exclusive vow of papal obedience. Now we have papal control. It said, a measure by which Emmerich effectively put all Templar resources at the disposal of the papacy. Within another decade, the knights were given exclusive rights by Pope Eugenius III to wear the Rose Croix, or the Rosy Cross, the Red Cross, on their white tunics. Now, we've all seen pictures of the Knights Templar, in their white tunics with the red cross on them. It says, as their list of properties lengthened with donations from Italy, Austria, Germany, Hungary, and the Holy Land, the Templars built hundreds of great stone castles. And if you've done any of the research into the Knights Templars, you'll see their properties. Imagine the wealth that it would take to build even one of those castles. It says wealthy travelers lodged in these castles because of their unmatched security. In other words, the wealthy people of Europe doing penance or to try to gain absolution from their sins or indulgences for their sins, who were traveling to Israel on pilgrimages to achieve that spiritual benefit, they stayed in these castles, built and protected by the Knights Templar. It says, convinced they were building a new world, the Templars called each other Frere Macon, or Brother Mason. Another link to Freemasonry, what we know today as Freemasonry. The Knights Templar referred to themselves as Brother Masons. Later, this term would be anglicized into Freemason. The Templars invented modern banking by applying an Oriental invention to their commerce. Agents of Chinese Emperor Cao Tsung, inventor of paper currency called Fetian, flying money, sought trade with the Middle East during the period of the Templar occupation. Cao Tsung was the first government on earth to enforce circulation of drafts as legal tender for debts. Evidently, Cao Tsung's agents introduced the Knights to this new medium of exchange created out of the merchant drafts. The Templars enhanced their already booming business of 1, accepting current accounts, deposits of jewelry, valuables, and title deeds. 2, making loans and advances, charging fees because the church, the Roman Catholic Church at that time, forbade interest, so they called them fees. We still deceive the American people with that sort of thing. And number 3, acting as agents for the secure transmission of such things by 4, adding circulating letters of credit, flying money, to serve as paper currency. To supply the Templars' currency needs may explain why paper in France was first manufactured in the poor knight's hometown of Troyes. Now, let me just stop and tell you, other research that I've done into the Knights Templar also indicates that that's where the banks of today learned about fractional lending. In other words, they can produce more assets to loan on interest than they actually have cash on hand to cover. It's a diabolically contrived means of theft. In other words, a bank can make loans on its own name, much like our government does, without anything to back it up. They can write paper loans and charge interest on value that they don't have. It's called fractional lending today. And this is how the Knights Templar got so wealthy so fast. By 1300, presiding over the world economy from their Paris office, the Templars had become an international power unto themselves. Engaged in diplomacy at the highest levels of state from the Holy Land westward, they set the tastes, the goals, the morality, the rules of the civilized world. Kings did their bidding when Henry III of England threatened to confiscate certain of the order's properties, he was upbraided by the Master Templar in the city of London, who said, What sayest thou, O king? So long as thou dost exercise justice, thou wilt reign. But if thou infringe it, thou wilt cease to be king. Unquote. So you see how quickly the Knights Templar gained in power and influence and wealth. He who controls the money cares not who. He who controls the money cares not who makes the laws. So now they're even, able to threaten kings, and eventually they even threatened the papacy. And that was their Waterloo, but we'll continue anyway. It says, but suddenly at their very zenith, the poor knights suffered a strange reversal of fortunes. In 1302, King Philip IV of France dared to challenge their sovereignty on their own soil. He asserted that in France, everyone, Knights Templars included, was subject to the king. Now remember, the Knights Templar were put underneath the authority of the papacy earlier, but now we have a French King Philip who ruled over France saying, hey, you Knights Templars, you have to answer to me. So he continues, Pope Boniface VIII jumped in and declared that France, the king, the Templars, all of them, and everybody else as well, belonged to Pontifex Maximus. So now you see a vast power struggle. And the whole civilized world's involved. Who's going to control the world? And the Pope steps in and says the Knights Templar, the King of France, and the King of every other nation, and all their subjects belong to Pontifex Maximus. And so this is going to go to the boiling point here over who controls who. He says it is absolutely necessary for the salvation of every human creature to be subject to the Roman Pontiff. So the Pope pulls out his magic trick to gain the ascendancy over the knights and the King of France in saying that your salvation and everyone else in the world is dependent upon me, the Pope. See, if you're going to control the world, you have to have a stick, right? So the Pope is assuming his diabolical, blasphemous claim that salvation for mankind resides in the papacy, and that one's eternal life is determined by the Pope. Now, it says, Philip then accused the Pope of illegitimacy, sexual misconduct, and heresy. Boniface prepared a bull of excommunicating Philip, but before it could be published, a band of Philip's mercenaries stormed the Vatican and demanded the Pope's resignation. Although the intruders were driven off, the shock to body and soul was too much for Boniface, and he died a month later. 2 successor popes held firm against Philip, the King of France, until Bertrand de Got, Archbishop of Bordeaux, was elected in 1305. Crowned in lions with the papal name Clement V, de Got moved the papacy to Avignon and began a long train of successions to Philip's royal prerogative. Finally, on October 13, 1307, Philip arrested all but 13 of the Templars in France, tried them, and upon evidence of their practice of Kabbalah, found them guilty of blasphemy and magic. And at least 50 knights were burned at the stake. So now you have an eternal hatred of the Knights Templar for the French king, who was supported by the Pope. So there's an animosity between the Knights Templar and the papacy. It says, from conquered documents it was learned that the Templars from the very beginning had renounced what Roman theologians called the religion of St. Peter. They had been initiated into a secret Gnostic branch of the Eastern Church known as the Primitive Christian Church. Because the primitive Christians' apostolic succession claimed to flow from John the Baptist and the Apostle John, they were called Johannites. The Johannites believed that although Jesus was imbued with a spirit wholly divine and endowed with the most outstanding qualities, he was not the true God. Consistent with Gnostic logic, the true Johannite God would never lower himself to become vile human matter. Jesus was in fact a false Messiah sent by the powers of darkness. He was justly crucified, although when his side was pierced, he did repent of his pretensions and receive divine forgiveness. Thanks to his repentance, Jesus now enjoys everlasting life in the celestial company of the saints. So you see the perverted beliefs of these people, these Gnostics. And why are they so perverted? Because Rome hated the Bible. Rome wouldn't allow anybody to read the Bible. What they knew, if they knew anything of the Scriptures, they got it from their priests. So they were subject to all kinds of heresy. Kabbalah, ancient Babylonian mysticism, hypnosis, Illuminism, Gnosticism, just satanic influence through and through. I mean, without the light of the Scriptures, all there is darkness. And the Knights Templar were corrupt. The French king was corrupt. Obviously, the papacy is corrupt. And corruption just breeds more corruption. Anyway, regarding miracles, the Johannites believe that Jesus did or may have done extraordinary or miraculous things, and that since God can do things incomprehensible to human intelligence, all the acts of Christ, as they are described in the Gospel, whether acts of human science or whether acts of divine power, can be accepted as true, except for the resurrection, which is omitted from the Templars' copy of the Gospel of St. John. Therefore, for all his wonderful attributes, Christ was nothing, a false prophet, and of no value. Only the higher God of heaven had power to save mankind. And who do you suppose they finally adopted as that higher God? Lucifer himself, the light bearer. Now you have Freemasonry full-blown, and a denial that Christ came in the flesh. And that is the secret esoteric belief of the Vatican. And I believe that before long, the papacy is going to renounce Christ altogether. As a matter of fact, I've done some research on a rabid traditionalist Roman Catholic site called MostHolyFamilyMonastery.com, and I've read the words that was taught by Pope John Paul II. And while he doesn't deny that Christ was come in the flesh, he merely says that the only reason Christ came was to show how man could transcend to become Christs in and of themselves. And if you want to see this for yourself, go to MostHolyFamilyMonastery.com and click on the link to the teachings of Pope John Paul II. And read it for yourself. See the very language that he used. And then you begin to understand his Freemasonic influence, his Kabbalistic influence, his Antichrist satanic influence, and it's as plain as the nose on your face that he was not a Christian at all, and that he was an ecumenist, uniting all the religions together under his authority to worship Lucifer. It's outstanding to read his own very words in his writings. And remember, it was George W. Bush that stood before the cameras during the dedication of John Paul II's Cultural Center, who described John Paul II as one of the great men, and that we should put John Paul II's teachings into practice in this country, in direct violation of the separation and establishment clauses of the Constitution. And if you follow the dots in that string, you'll completely understand why I say George W. Bush, as a skull and bonesman, was a papal knight, a knight of the most holy Eucharist, according to his initiation ritual into Skull and Bones. He was no Christian. Despite his profession, he was an esoteric Roman Catholic. He believes the same nonsense as the insiders of the Vatican believe. And it's going to deny Christ entirely. And that's where the Roman Catholic Church is headed. That's where ecumenism is headed. A complete and total denial of Christ and a veneration of a sick, sinful man to rule the world. Continuing with the book, it says, but the higher God avoided human matter, and so lordship over the material world belonged to Satanael. Satanael. Satanael, the evil brother of Jesus. Satanael alone could enrich mankind. Templar Kabbalah represented Satanael as the head of a goat emblazoned with, sometimes contained within, a pentagram, a five-pointed star. This symbol is deeply rooted in Old Testament Kabbalah, in which the goat is identified with power in the world and separation from God. On the greatest Israelite feast day, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, one goat was spared the sacrificial knife and was sprinkled with the blood of another goat killed for the sins of Israel. The spared goat, the scapegoat, was then banished from the congregation to bear Israel's sins into the wilderness, which typified the world. The scapegoat escaped with his life, his freedom. King Solomon conferred with evil spirits, but Scripture describes the spirits only generally. However, the Zohar, or Book of Splendor, one of the main works of ancient Kabbalistic literature, tells us evil spirits appeared to Israelites under the form of he-goats and made known to them all that they wished to learn, unquote. And we're going to continue with our study tomorrow about these abominations that make up the foundation of the Jesuit order, so we can better understand this Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order and what it's really all about. Thanks for listening to Inquisition Update. Stay tuned for Nicholas Arthur's Cross the Border. We'll see you tomorrow.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.